The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the training facility as Sarah Martinez adjusted the scope on her rifle for the 100th time that morning. Around her, the sounds of military drills echoed across the compound, but her focus remained laser-sharp on the target 2,000 yards away. At 26, she had already made a name for herself in the Army's sniper program, but today was different. Today, she was about to face the most elite marksman in the world. The invitation had come as a surprise 3 weeks earlier. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison had called her into his office with news that would change everything. The Navy SEALs were conducting a joint training exercise, and they needed the best snipers from each branch of the military. Sarah's record spoke for itself. She held the longest confirmed kill shot by a female sniper in military history, a feat accomplished during her second tour in Afghanistan. But records on paper were one thing. Proving herself to the SEALs would be another entirely. She remembered the conversation with her father the night before leaving for the training facility. Retired Marine Sergeant Major Robert Martinez had raised his daughter on military bases around the world, teaching her to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Mija, he had said, using the Spanish endearment he'd called her since childhood. These SEALs are going to test you in ways you've never been tested. They don't just want to see if you can shoot. They want to see if you belong. Sarah understood what he meant. The military had made significant strides in integrating women into combat roles, but the special operations community remained largely a boys' club. She had faced skepticism before, but never from operators who considered themselves the absolute pinnacle of military excellence. The SEALs had a reputation for being ruthless in their assessments, both of enemies and allies. The facility buzzed with activity as vehicles rolled in carrying the SEAL teams. Sarah watched from her position on the range as they unloaded their gear, noting the casual confidence in their movements. These weren't soldiers who questioned their abilities or worried about proving themselves. They moved with the assurance of men who had faced death countless times and emerged victorious. Her first encounter with the SEAL sharpshooters came during the initial briefing. Chief Petty Officer Marcus "Tank" Thompson, a massive man with arms like tree trunks and a beard that had seen better days, looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. Standing beside him were 3 other SEAL snipers. Petty Officer First, Class David "Rabbit" Rodriguez, whose quick movements had earned him his nickname. Senior Chief Kyle "Iceman" Foster, whose pale blue eyes seemed to see everything. And Petty Officer Second Class Jake "Hollywood" Williams, whose pretty boy looks belied his deadly skills. "Well, well," Tank said, his voice carrying a thick Texas drawl. "Looks like the Army sent us their poster girl." The comment drew chuckles from the other SEALs, but Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that reacting to such provocations only gave them more ammunition. The briefing officer, Navy Commander Patricia Wells, outlined the week's training schedule. They would be testing long-range precision shooting, moving target engagement, and urban sniper scenarios. The culmination would be a competition to see who could make the longest accurate shot under combat conditions. Sarah noticed the SEALs exchange glances when the 2-mile maximum range was announced. 2 miles? Rabbit whispered to Tank, loud, enough for Sarah to hear. Hope she brought her good luck charm. After the briefing, the snipers were given time to inspect their assigned rifles and equipment. Sarah had brought her own weapon, a custom Barrett M82A1 that she had personally modified over the years. The rifle had been with her through 3 combat deployments and countless training exercises. She knew every quirk, every nuance of its performance. As she began her inspection routine, she became aware of the SEALs watching her. They stood in a loose circle, their conversation carrying just loud enough for her to catch fragments. Probably never shot past 1,000 yards in. Anger, Hollywood said, examining his fingernails with theatrical boredom. Army probably gave her the record to make a point. Iceman added, his voice flat and emotionless. Politics, you know? Sarah continued her work, methodically checking the rifle's action, cleaning the barrel, and adjusting the scope. She had learned patience from her father, who had taught her that words were just noise until they were backed up by action. The SEALs could talk all they wanted. The targets wouldn't care about their opinions. Tank approached her position, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. "That's quite a setup you got there, sweetheart," he said, nodding at her rifle. "Looks like something a collector would keep in a display case." His teammates laughed at the implied insult, that her weapon was more for show than practical use. "It serves its purpose," Sarah replied simply, not looking up from her work. "I bet it does," Tank continued. "Question is, what happens when the wind kicks up and the pressure's on? Combat's a little different than shooting at paper targets on a nice, calm range." This time, Sarah did look up, meeting his gaze steadily. "I suppose we'll find out." The comment seemed to catch Tank off guard. He had expected either defensiveness or backing down, but Sarah's calm confidence was something he hadn't anticipated. For a moment, the big SEAL seemed unsure how to respond. As the afternoon wore on, the snipers began their initial range qualifications. Sarah watched as each SEAL took their turn, noting their techniques and capabilities. They were undeniably skilled, placing shots with mechanical precision at distances that would challenge most marksmen. When her turn came, she stepped up to the firing line with the same methodical approach she had used during her equipment inspection. Her first shot, at 800 yards, struck dead center. The second, at 1,200 yards, was equally precise. By the time she had completed the qualification course, the SEAL's joking had quieted considerably. Tank stood with his arms crossed, studying her with new interest. "Not bad for a warm-up," he grudgingly admitted. Sarah packed up her gear as the day's training concluded. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she knew the SEALs would be watching her every move, waiting for her to fail. But she also knew something they didn't yet. Understand, she hadn't come here to prove herself to them. She had come to show them what real precision looked like. The second day of training began before dawn, with the snipers assembling in the pre-dawn darkness for a field exercise that would test their abilities under realistic combat conditions. Sarah had barely slept, not from nerves, but from the sounds of the SEAL team members talking late into the night in the barracks next door. She caught fragments of their conversation through the thin walls, discussions about her performance, speculation about whether she could handle the pressure, and bets on when she would wash out. Commander Wells briefed them on the day's scenario as they stood in the cool morning air. Intelligence had identified a high-value target who would be moving through a simulated urban environment. The snipers would work in pairs, with one acting as spotter and the other as shooter. The catch was that the targets would only be visible for seconds at a time, requiring split-second decision-making and flawless execution. "Martinez," Wells announced, "you'll be paired with Chief Thompson." Sarah caught the slight smile that crossed Tank's face. The big SEAL was clearly pleased with the arrangement, likely seeing it as an opportunity to expose what he assumed were her weaknesses. As they gathered their gear, Tank made his intentions clear. "Listen up, Army," he said, hefting his massive rifle case. "I know you probably had some boys back home who went easy on you, but that ain't happening here. You mess up out there, people die. I don't plan on dying because you can't keep up." "I don't plan on letting that happen," Sarah replied evenly. The training area was a sprawling complex of buildings designed to simulate Middle Eastern architecture. Narrow alleyways, flat rooftops, and countless windows created a maze where enemies could appear and disappear in an instant. Sarah and Tank were assigned a position on the third floor of a partially constructed building, with clear sight lines across the target area. As they set up their equipment, Sarah noticed Tank watching her every move. She methodically established her firing position, checking angles, measuring distances, and accounting for environmental factors. The morning wind was picking up, and she made careful notes about its direction and intensity. "You always take this long to set up?" Tank asked, consulting his watch. "In a real firefight, the bad guys don't wait for you to get comfortable." In a real firefight, taking an extra 30 seconds to do things right can mean the difference between mission success and mission failure, Sarah responded, continuing her preparations. Their first targets appeared 20 minutes into the exercise, role players dressed as civilians but carrying concealed weapons. Tank spotted them first, calling out their position and distance. Sarah acquired the target through her scope, noting the challenging angle and the fact that innocent bystanders were moving through the area. 1,500 yards, moving left to right, wind 3 miles per hour from the east, Tank reported. You've got maybe 10 seconds before he disappears into that alley. Sarah controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow as she entered the zone that every sniper knew. That place where time seemed to stretch and the world narrowed down to the relationship between the shooter, the rifle, and the target. Her finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure as she led the target slightly to account for his movement. The shot broke clean, and through the scope, Sarah watched the target stumble and fall. A red paint mark on his chest confirmed the hit. Tank lowered his binoculars and looked at her with something approaching respect. "Lucky shot," he said, but his tone had lost some of its earlier dismissiveness. The morning continued with increasingly difficult scenarios. Targets appeared at extreme ranges, moved through crowds of civilians, and presented themselves for only brief moments. Sarah adapted to each challenge, making shots that impressed even herself. Tank's spotting proved excellent. His years of experience allowed him to quickly identify targets and provide accurate range and wind estimates. During a break between exercises, the other SEAL snipers approached their position. Rabbit was carrying a tablet that displayed the morning's scores, and his expression was thoughtful rather than mocking. "Looks like the Army girl can shoot," he said, showing the tablet to Tank. Sarah's accuracy rating was the highest of any participant, with several shots at ranges that pushed the limits of what most snipers considered possible. "It's still early," Hollywood interjected, though his earlier cockiness had been replaced by wariness. "Let's see how she does when the pressure really gets turned up." Iceman said nothing, but Sarah noticed him studying her rifle setup with professional interest. As the most experienced sniper in the group, his opinion carried weight with the others. The afternoon brought urban movement scenarios that required the sniper teams to relocate frequently while maintaining overwatch on their assigned areas. Sarah and Tank found themselves moving through the mock city, communicating through hand signals and coordinating their movements like a team that had worked together for years rather than hours. During one particularly challenging evolution, they received word that multiple high-value targets were converging on a central plaza. The snipers would have to engage multiple threats simultaneously while avoiding civilian casualties. Sarah and Tank positioned themselves on a rooftop overlooking the plaza, with clear fields of fire in multiple directions. "This is going to get messy," Tank warned as they watched the scenario unfold below. "Multiple movers, crowds of civilians, and we've got other sniper teams in the area. One mistake, and we could end up shooting the good guys." Sarah nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. Through her scope, she watched as role players began filtering into the plaza. Some were clearly marked as civilians, others as enemy combatants, but many fell into a gray area that required split-second judgment calls. The first target presented himself near a fruit vendor's stall, his weapon poorly concealed beneath a jacket. Sarah acquired the target and was about to fire when a child ran into her sight picture, chasing a ball that had bounced away from a group of playing children. "Hold fire," Tank whispered urgently. "Civilian in the way." Sarah held her position, tracking the target as he moved through the crowd. The child retrieved his ball and ran back toward his friends, clearing Sarah's line of sight just as the target began to raise his weapon toward a group of peacekeepers entering the plaza. Her shot took the target center mass, dropping him instantly. Before his body had hit the ground, Sarah was already acquiring a second target who had appeared on a balcony overlooking the plaza. "Second target balcony, 11 o'clock. Tank called out. "I see him," Sarah replied, her rifle already swinging toward the new threat. The balcony shot was at an extreme upward angle, requiring her to adjust for the trajectory difference. The target was partially concealed behind a concrete barrier, presenting only a small portion of his torso. Sarah took the shot, watching through her scope as the paint round struck the target in the upper chest, marking another successful engagement. The exercise continued for another hour, with Sarah and Tank working together to neutralize threat after threat. By the time Commander Wells called an end to the day's training, they had achieved the highest success rate of any sniper team in the exercise. As they packed up their equipment, Tank was quieter than usual. Finally, he spoke up. "You know, Martinez, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? Tank was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Honestly, I expected someone who was good enough to pass the tests but would fold under real pressure. Someone who was here because of politics rather than ability. And now? Now I'm thinking maybe I was wrong. He hefted his rifle case and started toward the vehicles. Don't let it go to your head, though. Tomorrow's going to be even harder. The third morning brought with it a sandstorm that reduced visibility to less than 50 yards and sent most of the training staff scrambling for cover. Sarah stood at the window of the operations center, watching the brown wall of dust and debris sweep across the training complex. Most military exercises would have been postponed under such conditions, but the SEALs operated by different rules. Commander Wells gathered the snipers in the briefing room as the storm raged outside. "Gentlemen and lady," she said with a nod, to Sarah, "welcome to real-world conditions. Your enemies don't wait for perfect weather, and neither do we. Today's exercise will test your ability to operate in degraded visibility conditions." Tank snorted from his position near the back of the room. "Can't shoot what you can't see, ma'am." "That's where you're wrong, Chief," Wells replied. "Today you'll be using thermal imaging systems and sound triangulation to engage targets in zero visibility conditions. The scenario is this. A high-value target is being transported through the training area during the storm, believing the weather will provide cover. Your job is to stop that transport." Sarah felt a familiar excitement building in her chest. Adverse weather shooting was one of her specialties, developed during long winter training exercises in Alaska, and refined during desert deployments where sandstorms were a constant threat. Her father had taught her to see weather not as an obstacle, but as another tool to be mastered and used. The equipment issued for the exercise was state-of-the-art thermal imaging technology that could penetrate dust and debris to identify heat signatures. Sarah familiarized herself with the system quickly, noting its capabilities and limitations. The thermal scope would show her targets, but factors like distance, wind drift, and bullet trajectory would still need to be calculated using traditional methods. "Martinez, you're with Rodriguez today," Wells announced. "Chief Thompson will be working with Petty Officer Williams." Rabbit Rodriguez had been quieter since Sarah's performance the previous day, his earlier mockery replaced by professional curiosity. As they prepared their gear, he asked, "You ever done thermal shooting before?" "Some," Sarah replied, not elaborating on the extensive training she had received in adverse weather conditions. "It's trickier than regular optics," Rabbit continued. "Thermal shows you where they are, but it doesn't give you the same precision references for range estimation. Everything looks different when you're seeing heat instead of light." Sarah nodded, appreciating his willingness to share tactical knowledge despite their earlier tensions. "What's the maximum effective range on this system?" "About 1,800 yards in good conditions. In this soup, maybe 1,200 if we're lucky." They made their way to their assigned position, a concrete observation tower that provided elevation over the training area. The sandstorm was at its peak now, with winds gusting to 40 miles per hour and visibility reduced to virtually nothing. Sarah set up her rifle and thermal scope, taking time to calibrate the system and establish reference points for range estimation. Through the thermal imaging, the training area looked like an alien landscape. Buildings appeared as geometric shapes against the cooler background, while vehicles and personnel showed up as bright white signatures against the darker surroundings. Sarah spent several minutes studying the terrain, memorizing landmarks and calculating distances to likely target areas. "Transports moving," came the voice through their radio. "Multiple vehicles, heading north through Sector 7. Sarah swung her thermal scope toward the indicated area, scanning for the heat signatures that would indicate the target convoy. The thermal imaging revealed 3 vehicles moving in formation, their engines glowing bright white against the cooler background of the storm. "I've got them," Rabbit called out, pressing his eyes to his spotting scope. "Range approximately 1,400 yards, moving left to right at about 30 miles per hour." Sarah tracked the lead vehicle through her scope, noting the way the thermal signature revealed not just the vehicle but the occupants inside. The high-value target would likely be in the middle vehicle, protected by security teams in the lead and trail cars. "Winds gusting to 40 from the southwest," Rabbit reported. That's going to push your shot significantly at this range. Sarah made mental calculations, accounting for the wind drift, the movement of the target, and the ballistic characteristics of her rifle at extended range. The thermal scope showed her the target, but the shot would require all of her traditional sniping skills to execute successfully. The convoy was approaching a choke point where they would have to slow down to navigate around a simulated roadblock. Sarah waited, controlling her breathing as she prepared for the shot. Through the thermal imaging, she could see the individual heat signatures of the occupants in each vehicle. Middle vehicle is slowing, Rabbit reported. Range now 1,300 yards, wind holding steady at 35 miles per hour. Sarah's crosshairs settled on the middle vehicle as it negotiated the obstacle. She could see the bright white signature of what appeared to be multiple occupants. The shot would need to be precise. In a real scenario, missing the high-value target could result in his escape and the compromise of the entire mission. Her finger found the trigger, applying steady pressure as she led the target to account for its movement and the wind drift. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the thermal scope, she watched the trajectory of the shot. The impact was invisible in the swirling dust, but the reaction of the convoy told the story. The middle vehicle came to an abrupt stop, and she could see the heat signatures of the occupants as they exited the vehicles, some moving while others remained stationary, indicating casualties. "Hit confirmed," came the voice over the radio. "High-value target down." Rabbit lowered his spotting scope and looked at Sarah with undisguised amazement. That was a hell of a shot. 1,300 yards in a sandstorm with gusting winds. Most snipers wouldn't even attempt it. Before Sarah could respond, their radio crackled to life again. "All stations, be advised, secondary targets are moving. Through Sector 12. Multiple personnel on foot using the storm as cover." Sarah swung her thermal scope to the new area, scanning for the heat signatures that would indicate enemy personnel. The thermal imaging revealed several bright spots moving between buildings, their body heat clearly visible against the cooler background of the concrete structures. "I count 6 targets," she reported, moving in tactical formation through the alley system. "Confirmed," Rabbit replied, tracking them through his thermal spotter. "Range varies from 800 to 1,000 yards, and they're using cover effectively." This presented a more complex challenge than the vehicle engagement. The targets were moving individually, using buildings and obstacles for cover, and presenting themselves for only brief moments. Sarah would need to engage multiple threats quickly and accurately, while they attempted to escape through the maze-like training area. The first target emerged from behind a building, moving quickly toward another position. Sarah tracked him smoothly, accounting for his speed and the wind conditions. Her shot dropped him cleanly, the thermal signature going dark as he fell. "Target down," she reported, already shifting to acquire the next threat. The remaining targets had heard the shot and were now moving more cautiously, using every available piece of cover to mask their movement. Sarah waited patiently, watching through her thermal scope for them to make mistakes. The second target appeared at the corner of a building, exposing himself as he attempted to observe their position. Sarah's shot caught him center mass, eliminating another threat from the scenario. One by one, she engaged the remaining targets, each shot requiring precise calculations and flawless execution. The thermal imaging allowed her to see them clearly despite the sandstorm, but every other aspect of the shots remained challenging. When the exercise ended, Sarah and Rabbit made their way back to the operations center through the dying storm. The wind was beginning to subside, and patches of clear air were starting to appear through the dust cloud. 6 for 6, Rabbit said, shaking his head in disbelief. "In a sandstorm with 40-mile-per-hour winds, that's not normal, you know. That, right?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Define normal." Inside the operations center, the other sniper teams were debriefing their performance. Tank and Hollywood had managed 3 successful engagements out of 7 attempts, which was considered excellent performance under the conditions. Iceman and his partner had achieved 4 out of 6. When Sarah's performance was announced, 8 successful engagements out of 8 attempts, the room fell silent. Commander Wells looked at the scores twice as if verifying the numbers. "Martinez," she said finally, "that's the highest score ever recorded for the adverse weather exercise." Tank was staring at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. The skepticism was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect, or perhaps wariness. Hollywood and Iceman exchanged glances, their earlier dismissiveness completely absent. Lucky storm, Hollywood said finally, but his tone lacked conviction. Day 4 began with an unexpected change in the training schedule. Commander Wells had been called away on urgent business, leaving the exercise planning to Senior Chief Foster, Iceman, whose reputation for creative and brutal training scenarios was legendary throughout the special operations community. Sarah sensed the change in atmosphere immediately as the snipers assembled for the morning briefing. Iceman stood at the front of the room, his pale blue eyes scanning each face with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. When his gaze settled on Sarah, she felt as though he was looking straight through her, cataloging weaknesses and vulnerabilities that she might not even know she possessed. "Today we're going to do things a little differently," he announced in his characteristic flat tone. "The previous exercises have been adequate for basic evaluation, but special operations requires more than technical proficiency. It requires the ability to perform under psychological pressure that would break most people." Tank shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even among the SEALs, Iceman's training methods were considered extreme. Sarah had heard stories about exercises he had designed that left experienced operators questioning their career choices. "The scenario is simple," Iceman continued. "Hostage rescue. 12 civilian hostages are being held in a building complex. The terrorists have threatened to execute one hostage every 10 minutes until their demands are met. Your job is to neutralize all hostile targets while ensuring 0 civilian casualties." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Here's where it gets interesting. The hostages are real people, military family members who have volunteered for the exercise. The terrorists are role players, but they're armed with non-lethal weapons that will simulate the execution of hostages if you fail to act quickly enough, or if you make targeting errors." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Training with real civilians in the line of fire was almost unheard of, even in special operations circles. The psychological pressure of knowing that real people's safety depended on your precision would be enormous. "Each sniper will work alone," Iceman continued. "No spotters, no backup. You'll have access to full surveillance feeds from the building, but all targeting decisions and engagements are yours alone. Questions?" Hollywood raised his hand. "Senior Chief, what's the consequence for civilian casualties?" Iceman's expression didn't change. "The volunteer hostages will experience the full simulation of being shot. Paint rounds, simulated blood, the works. They'll know they've been killed by friendly fire. You'll get to explain to them afterward how your mistake cost their life." The room was completely silent. Even Tank, who had never shown fear of anything, looked pale at the prospect of potentially traumatizing innocent civilians through poor marksmanship. "Martinez," Iceman said suddenly, "you'll go first." Sarah felt every eye in the room turned toward her. Of course she would go first. Iceman was making a statement. If the outsider, the woman, could handle his scenario, then the SEALs would be expected to perform even better. If she failed, it would confirm their suspicions about her belonging in their world. The building complex was a maze of interconnected structures designed to simulate a Middle Eastern urban environment. As Sarah studied the surveillance feeds, she could see the 12 hostages scattered throughout different rooms, each guarded by armed role players. The hostages were indeed real people. She could see the genuine fear in their eyes, even knowing it was an exercise. Her rifle was set up on a rooftop position that provided overlapping fields of fire into most of the building's windows. The surveillance feeds gave her a real-time view of the situation, but the angles were limited, and she would have to rely primarily on direct observation through her scope. "Exercise begins now," came Iceman's voice through her earpiece. "First execution in 10 minutes. Sarah began her systematic evaluation of the building, identifying each hostile target and noting their positions relative to the hostages. Some shots would be straightforward, clear lines of sight with minimal risk to civilians. Others would require threading the needle between captor and hostage with millimeter precision. Through her scope, she could see into a third-floor room where a middle-aged woman sat tied to a chair, a role player standing behind her with a weapon pointed at her head. The shot would need to be taken at a steep upward angle through a partially Open window with less than 6 inches of margin for error. 5 minutes to first execution, Iceman announced. Sarah forced herself to slow down, fighting the artificial urgency that was designed to induce mistakes. She methodically calculated the angle, distance, and environmental factors for each potential shot, building a priority list based on which hostages were in the most immediate danger. The first shot needed to be perfect. Through her scope, she could see a role player in a ground-floor room who had just raised his weapon toward a teenage boy, one of the military family volunteers. The angle was challenging, requiring her to shoot through an open doorway while avoiding a support beam that partially obstructed her view. Sarah controlled her breathing, settling into the familiar rhythm that preceded every important shot of her career. Her crosshairs found the target's center mass, accounting for the slight deviation caused by shooting through the doorway. The trigger broke cleanly, and she watched the role player stumble backward as the paint round struck him in the chest. "Hostile down, first floor," she reported, already shifting to acquire her second target. The pace accelerated rapidly. Each shot required split-second decision-making as role players moved throughout the building, sometimes using hostages as human shields, other times presenting themselves as clear targets. Sarah moved through her priority list methodically, taking shots that would have been considered impossible under normal training conditions. A particularly challenging engagement came when she spotted a role player on the second floor who had positioned himself directly behind a hostage, using the civilian's body as cover while threatening other captives. Only a small portion of his shoulder was visible beside the hostage's head, perhaps 3 inches of target area at a range of 400 yards. Sarah studied the shot through her scope, noting the breathing pattern of both the hostage and the captor. She would need to time her shot for the moment when their natural body movements created maximum separation, giving her the best chance of hitting the target without endangering the civilian. She waited, watching through her scope as the role player gestured with his weapon, his shoulder moving in and out of her crosshairs. When the moment came, she took the shot without hesitation. The paint round struck the edge of his shoulder, spinning him away from the hostage and marking him as eliminated. "Hostile down, second floor," she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 23 minutes after the exercise began, Sarah reported the final target eliminated. All 12 hostages were safe, and all hostile role players had been neutralized. She had fired 17 shots, each one requiring precision that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in sniper training. As she packed up her equipment, Sarah could hear Iceman's voice on the radio confirming the results with the role players and hostages. Every shot had been accurate, every targeting decision correct. Most importantly, every civilian was walking away unharmed. The debrief took place in the operations center, with the SEALs gathering around a large screen that displayed a replay of each engagement. Iceman narrated the action with clinical precision, pointing out the technical challenges and split-second decisions that had made the difference between success and catastrophe. "The shoulder shot on the second floor," he said, pausing the video at the moment of impact, "required threading a 3-inch target window at 400 yards with a civilian's head 6 inches away. The margin for error was essentially 0. Tank was staring at the screen with an expression Sarah had never seen before, something approaching awe. "How do you even attempt a shot like that?" he asked. "You don't," Iceman replied, his pale eyes fixed on Sarah. "You either know you can make it, or you don't take it. There's no middle ground when real lives are at stake." Hollywood cleared his throat. "What was your time for the complete scenario?" 23 minutes, 14 seconds, Iceman replied. Previous record for this exercise was 38 minutes, and that was with civilian casualties. The room was quiet as the implications sank in. Sarah had not only completed the most challenging sniper scenario in their training arsenal, she had done it faster and more accurately than anyone in the program's history. Rabbit broke the silence. "Martinez, can I ask you something? Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "My father started teaching me when I was 8. He said that if you're going to do something, you should do it perfectly, or not at all." "Your father was military?" "Marine. 3 wars, 2 silver stars, and a Purple Heart. He taught me that there's no such thing as good enough when people's lives depend on your skills. Iceman nodded slowly. Smart man. What else did he teach you? That respect isn't given based on who you are. It's earned based on what you can do. The fifth day arrived with perfect conditions, clear skies, minimal wind, and the kind of atmospheric stability that snipers dreamed about. But Sarah knew better than to trust the apparent calm. Commander Wells had returned overnight with new orders that would determine not just the outcome of the training exercise, but potentially the future of joint operations between the Army and Navy Special Operations units. Ladies and gentlemen, Wells announced during the morning briefing, today's exercise is being observed by personnel from JSOC, the Pentagon, and several allied nations. The results will directly influence policy decisions about integration of female snipers into Tier 1 Special Operations units. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She wasn't just representing herself anymore. She was representing every woman who had ever dreamed of serving in the most elite units of the military. The pressure should have been overwhelming, but instead, she felt the familiar calm that preceded her best performances. Tank leaned over and whispered, "No pressure, right?" Despite everything they had been through over the past week, his comment brought a slight smile to her face. The Big SEAL had evolved from skeptic to something approaching a protective older brother, and she appreciated his attempt to lighten the mood. The day's scenario was deceptively simple, a long-range precision shooting competition that would culminate in attempts at the maximum range target 2 miles away. Each sniper would have 3 attempts at various distances, with points awarded based on accuracy and consistency. The final challenge would separate the good from the exceptional. Sarah studied the weather data carefully as she prepared her equipment. The morning calm was expected to hold for several hours, but thermal currents would begin building as the day heated up, creating convection patterns that could affect bullet trajectory at extreme ranges. She would need to time her shots carefully to take advantage of the stable conditions. The shooting positions were set up on an elevated platform that provided clear lines of sight across the entire range complex. Observation posts at various distances held the targets, from the relatively close 1,000-yard markers to the intimidating 2-mile maximum range position that appeared as little more than a speck on the horizon. As the snipers took their positions, Sarah became aware of the observers gathering behind the firing line. She could see the crisp uniforms and serious expressions of high-ranking military officials, their conversations hushed but intense. Among them were several foreign officers whose presence indicated the international implications of the day's events. Iceman approached her position as she completed her final equipment checks. "Martinez, you know what's riding on this, right?" "I know, Senior Chief." "The boys have been talking," he continued, his pale eyes studying her face. "They think you've been sandbagging, holding back your real capabilities to make the reveals more dramatic." Sarah looked up from her rifle scope adjustments. "What do you think?" "I think," Iceman said slowly, "that we're about to find out what you're really capable of." The competition began with the closest targets, 1,000 yards, well within the comfort zone of any competent sniper. Sarah watched as Tank took his position for the first shot, his massive frame settling behind his rifle with practiced ease. His shot struck within 2 inches of center, earning approving nods from the observers. Hollywood followed with a shot that was technically perfect, but lacked the artistry that separated good snipers from great ones. Rabbit and the other SEAL snipers performed admirably, each demonstrating the skills that had earned them their elite status. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the firing line with the same methodical precision she had displayed all week. Her first shot at 1,000 yards struck dead center, followed by 2 more shots that grouped within a half-inch circle. The observers' murmurs grew more animated as they noted the exceptional accuracy. The distances increased progressively, 1,500 yards, 1,800, 2,200. Each range eliminated some competitors as the technical demands exceeded their capabilities. By the time they reached the 2,500-yard line, only Sarah and 2 of the SEAL snipers remained in contention. Tank had been eliminated at 2,200 yards, his shot missing the target by mere inches due to a slight miscalculation of wind drift. As he packed up his equipment, he paused beside Sarah's position. "You've got this," he said simply. "Show them what real shooting looks like." The final challenge was the 2-mile shot, 3,520 yards of desert air, thermal currents, and variables that pushed the limits of both equipment and human capability. At that distance, the target appeared no larger than a pinhead through even the most powerful scopes. The bullet would be in flight for over 4 seconds, time enough for countless factors to influence its path. Rabbit attempted the shot first, his rifle thundering across the range as the bullet began its long arc toward the distant target. Through the spotting scopes, the observers watched for nearly 5 seconds before seeing the dust plume that indicated his shot had struck low and left of the target. Iceman took his position next, the senior sniper bringing all of his years of experience to bear on the challenge. His shot was closer, striking within the target zone but missing the center ring that would represent a confirmed kill in combat conditions. Now it was Sarah's turn. As she settled behind her rifle, the range fell completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was waiting to witness what would happen next. Through her scope, the target was barely visible, a small square of white against the brown desert background. Sarah had made shots at this distance before, during training exercises that weren't observed by Pentagon officials and foreign dignitaries, but never under these circumstances, with so much riding on the outcome. She began her calculations, factoring in every variable she could identify. The morning air was still relatively cool, creating density layers that would affect the bullet's path. The slight breeze from the southeast would push the projectile minimally but measurably. The Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, would become significant at this extreme range. Sarah controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate as she had been taught years ago by her father on a shooting range in Texas. She could almost hear his voice. "Mija, the rifle doesn't miss. Only the shooter misses. Trust your training, trust your calculations, and trust yourself." Her finger found the trigger, applying the smooth, steady pressure that would send the bullet on its long journey. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and she immediately returned to her scope to observe the impact. 4.5 seconds later, a small puff of dust appeared directly in the center of the target. The range remained silent for a moment as spotters confirmed what everyone had witnessed. "Target," came the official call. "Dead center hit." The silence broke as observers began talking rapidly among themselves. Sarah remained in position, watching through her scope as the confirmation flags were raised at the distant target position. She had done it. A confirmed precision hit at 2 miles under observation by some of the most demanding evaluators in the military. As she began to pack up her equipment, Tank appeared beside her position. The big SEAL was grinning like a proud parent, his earlier skepticism completely forgotten. "Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the club. You've just joined a very small group of people who can make that shot when it matters." Hollywood and Rabbit joined them. Their earlier rivalry replaced by professional respect. Even among the SEALs, a 2-mile precision shot was the stuff of legend, and they knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Iceman approached last, his expression unreadable as always. When he reached Sarah's position, he extended his hand, in a gesture of respect that carried more weight than any formal commendation. "Outstanding performance, Martinez," he said in his characteristic flat tone. "Your father would be proud." As the day's competition concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by the observers who had come to evaluate her performance. The questions came rapidly, about her training, her techniques, and her thoughts on integration into special operations units. But her attention was focused on her rifle, the weapon that had carried her through combat deployments and now through the most challenging evaluation of her career. Tomorrow would bring the final day of training, and she knew the SEALs would give her their ultimate test. The final day of training began not with a formal briefing, but with an unexpected knock on Sarah's barracks door at 0500 hours. She opened it to find Tank standing in the hallway, fully dressed and carrying his gear bag. "Time to go, Martinez," he said simply. "Go where?" The briefing isn't until 0700. Change of plans. The team decided we needed to conduct one final evaluation. Just us. No observers, no officials, no pressure from above. We need to know if you're really one of us, or if you've just been putting on a good show. Sarah dressed quickly and gathered her equipment, following Tank through the pre-dawn darkness to a vehicle waiting outside the barracks. Inside were the other SEAL snipers, Hollywood, Rabbit, and Iceman, their expressions serious and focused. As they drove through the desert, Iceman explained the situation. What happened yesterday was impressive, but it was still a controlled environment. Perfect conditions, known distances, stationary targets. Today we're going to create a scenario that simulates real combat conditions as closely as possible without actually getting shot at. The vehicle stopped at a remote section of the training area that Sarah had never seen before. In the growing light of dawn, she could see a complex that looked like it had been designed by someone with an intimate knowledge of Middle Eastern urban warfare. Buildings showed realistic battle damage, complete with blast holes and partially collapsed walls. Smoke generators created a hazy atmosphere that would complicate long-range shooting. The scenario is simple, Tank explained as they unloaded their gear. High-value target extraction. We have a friendly asset trapped in that complex, surrounded by hostile forces. Our job is to provide overwatch and precision fire support while a ground team moves in for the extraction. Sarah studied the complex through her binoculars, noting the multiple levels, limited sight lines, and numerous positions where enemy snipers could be concealed. It was exactly the kind of environment where special operations snipers earned their reputation, and sometimes their graves. What makes this different from the previous exercises? She asked. Hollywood smiled grimly. The opposition force isn't role players. It's a SEAL team from another unit that's been specifically briefed to test your capabilities. They know you're coming, they know you're good, and they've been given license to use every trick in the book to defeat you. As they moved into position on a ridgeline overlooking the complex, Sarah began to understand the true nature of the test. This wasn't about technical marksmanship anymore. It was about tactical thinking, adaptability, and the kind of combat instincts that couldn't be taught in any school. Her assigned position provided good fields of fire into the complex, but she immediately noticed the disadvantages. The morning sun would be directly in her eyes within an hour, creating glare that would complicate target identification. The ridgeline was the most obvious position for a sniper, which meant the opposition force would be watching it carefully. Rabbit, you're on the eastern approach, Iceman directed. Hollywood takes the south. Tank, you've got the northern exit routes. Martinez, you're our primary overwatch. Everything in the central complex is your responsibility. As the team dispersed to their positions, Sarah began her detailed study of the target area. Through her scope, she could see movement in the buildings, but determining friend from foe would require careful observation and split-second decision-making. The opposition force would be dressed as both friendly troops and enemy combatants, creating a complex identification challenge. Ground team is moving, came the radio call. Extraction commences in 15 minutes. Sarah settled into her shooting position, making final adjustments to her scope and checking her range cards. At distances varying from 400 to 1,200 yards, she would need to be able to engage targets quickly and accurately, while distinguishing between threats and non-combatants. The first indication of enemy activity came from a third-floor window where Sarah caught a glimpse of movement. Through her scope, she could see a figure in military gear positioning what appeared to be a rifle. The range was approximately 800 yards, and the target was partially concealed behind a window frame. She held her fire, waiting for positive identification. The opposition force was known for using deception tactics, including positioning friendly troops in locations where they might be mistaken for enemies by hasty snipers. Sniper, third floor, building 2, came Tank's voice over the radio. Can you confirm? Sarah studied the figure through her scope, noting the weapon profile and positioning. After several seconds of observation, she made her determination. Confirmed hostile. Third floor, window on the right side of building 2. Her shot broke cleanly, and she watched the figure disappear from the window. Whether it was an actual hit or the target taking cover, She couldn't tell from her position. "Good hit," came a voice over the radio that she didn't recognize, presumably one of the opposition force members confirming the engagement. The pace of the exercise accelerated quickly. Targets appeared and disappeared throughout the complex as the ground team moved closer to their objective. Sarah found herself engaging threats at varying ranges, each shot requiring rapid target identification and precise fire. A particularly challenging moment came when two figures appeared simultaneously, on different rooftops. One was clearly carrying a weapon and moving in a manner consistent with hostile intent. The other appeared to be a non-combatant, but was positioned where he could observe and report on the friendly ground team's movement. Sarah made the split-second decision to engage the armed figure first, then quickly shifted to the second target. Her first shot eliminated the obvious threat, but as she prepared to fire on the second target, she hesitated. Something about the figure's movement pattern and posture suggested he might be a friendly asset rather than an enemy observer. "Tank, can you confirm the individual on the eastern rooftop?" she called over the radio. "Negative visual from my position." "Your call, Martinez." Sarah held her fire, continuing to observe the figure through her scope. After several more seconds, the individual made a hand signal that she recognized as a friendly identification marker. Her decision to wait had prevented a blue-on-blue engagement that would have compromised the mission. "Good call," came Iceman's voice over the radio. "That was one of our assets." The extraction reached its climax when the ground team located their target and began moving toward the extraction point. Sarah provided continuous overwatch, engaging multiple threats as the opposition force attempted to prevent the friendly team's escape. Her final shot of the exercise was the most demanding, a moving target at over 1,000 yards who was pursuing the extraction team with what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade. The target was moving rapidly across broken terrain, presenting himself for only brief moments between obstacles. Sarah led the target carefully, accounting for his speed and direction while compensating for the extreme range. Her shot connected, just as the target was raising his weapon, eliminating the threat and securing the extraction team's escape route. "Exercise complete," came the call over the radio. "All objectives achieved, extraction successful." As the teams gathered for the debrief, Sarah was surprised by the respect she saw in the faces of the opposition force members. These were SEALs who had volunteered to serve as her final test, and their expressions showed that she had passed with flying colors. The formal debrief was conducted by a SEAL Master Chief Sarah hadn't met before, apparently the senior member of the opposition force. His evaluation was brief but comprehensive. Martinez demonstrated exceptional marksmanship, sound tactical judgment, and the ability to adapt to changing conditions under pressure, he reported. Her performance exceeded the standards expected of Tier 1 Special Operations snipers. As the evaluation concluded and the team prepared to return to base, Tank pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "You know what this means, don't you?" he asked. "That I passed your tests?" "No," Tank replied seriously. "It means you've set a new standard. Every sniper who comes through this program is going to be measured against what you accomplished this week." Sarah looked out across the desert training complex where she had proven herself to some of the most elite warriors in the world. "My father always said that breaking barriers wasn't about being better than everyone else. It was about being so good that nobody could ignore your capabilities." "Well," Tank said with a grin, "mission accomplished, Martinez. Welcome to the Brotherhood." As their vehicle drove back toward the main base, Sarah reflected on the week that had changed everything. She had arrived as an outsider facing skepticism and doubt. She was leaving as a proven member of an elite community that measured worth not by gender or background, but by ability under pressure. The 2-mile shot that had silenced her critics was already becoming legend, but Sarah knew that the real victory had been earning the respect of warriors who understood what it meant to excel when failure meant lives lost. In proving herself to the SEALs, she had opened doors for every woman who would follow in her footsteps.